Hello everyone, I hope this is going to work, especially from a sound point of view, because we've had troubles there before. So I've got the microphone hooked up, but I've also got the issue with my voice and losing it. This is a millionth recurrent infection on top of the many long COVID opportunistic infections that I've had, so please bear with me. I'll try and sort the sound out if anyone raises it, but in the meantime I've done my best to make sure it's loud enough. This was a video that was meant to come out before I went away, and I apologise for that. The reason it didn't is I purely just ran out of time, not helped by not being very well. So I'm trying to get this one out before I go away again, and because I've had a lot of questions about autism and autism in females and distinguishing it from anorexia, I've decided to do a video relating to that. So it'd be using myself as an n=1 example, but also using knowledge from the likes of Tony Attwood and various books that I've read, which I'll leave at the end of the presentation for you to go and read or look at yourselves. And I'd highly recommend that, especially if you are considering that that might be a diagnosis that is relevant to you, especially if you have an eating disorder. Okay, so I'll leave it there and start the video. Okay, so I decided to do this video for a number of reasons, and not least the underrepresentation of females in autism. We often don't see females referred till much later in life, if at all. So for example, I didn't get a diagnosis until I was 30, and we're very used to boys being referred from a young age because they present differently. They present often with behaviour problems that are picked up at school. These are the latest ICD-11 DSM-5 guidelines, which have progressed somewhat since ICD-10, DSM-4. Must add at this point that the research into autism was based on research of boys, and this goes again some way to explaining why we have been so used to referring boys but not girls for autism assessments. They have now also got rid of language difficulties and pervasive developmental difficulties, so it can no longer be presumed that this is just a learning disability. The vast majority of people who have autism don't have a learning disability, but it will make such a difference to their mental health care if they show signs of autistic spectrum condition and are referred early on, as it brings a lot of sense to individuals, a lot of closure for them and their families, not least in anorexia. And there's a lot of difficulties in anorexia because of course there's a lot of crossover. Things like rigidity, hyperfocus, obsessional behaviour, social isolation all occur in anorexia, but all that's needed is neurodevelopmental history, and that evidence can also be gleaned from a parent, it can be gleaned from school reports, and that can help make that diagnosis. We also need to remember that females present differently. They're more social than males, and they have been learning to camouflage and hide their behaviour from a young age, so they can be much harder to pick up on. Even down to the toys, it's always presumed that the obsession with toys will be an obsession with trains, which goes back to the view that this is a boy's condition, whereas in fact girls, they might have the gender-specific toys such as dolls, but it's the how they play with them and the persistence, e.g. the collecting them, lining them up, collecting their clothes, but not necessarily imaginative. So this is me, a rather large baby at my christening, and one of the things I've hated since I can remember is hugs, and people have often referred to me standing like a plank when I am hugged. Just doesn't come naturally, and the only person I can truly naturally hug is my best friend, who's also autistic. The literature often talks about over-fascination with things that aren't even toys from a very early age. And as you can see here, this is perhaps not the safest activity. I don't know where my parents were at this point, but this is me playing with the cable of the tape recorder. For those who are much more modern than me, these existed before iPads and iPhones. Such seemingly mundane items can fascinate an autistic individual for literally hours. And another mundane object, your everyday box. Meanwhile, lots of toys scattered around, but this would be my choice. That's not to say that other toys wouldn't be used in the ways that I've already described, but it just means that mundane objects would be given equal interest. So this is nursery school, and for me this is where a huge amount of my autism was displayed, though not picked up. By this point I was selectively mute, so I would only speak to my parents and my brother, and that continued to about the age of 6 and 7, so that continued into primary school. I would also have huge meltdowns, separation anxiety about being left at primary school. And in my head I can kind of remember what that was about, that I just didn't get it, that I couldn't play group games, that I couldn't speak to the other children, which made it very difficult. I remember it feeling very confusing, like they'd already been given an instruction manual or a blueprint on how to behave and how to follow rules, and I hadn't. I can remember being taken into the toilets and deciding I was going to do it backwards for some reason. I was going to dry my hands, wash my hands, and then go to the toilet, because nobody had ever told me the reasons we do that the other way round. So this is me in reception in primary school, and as you can see by the face being pulled, I still hadn't been given that blueprint or that instruction manual on how I was meant to behave. So this actually, for a short point in my life, was a time when I was considered quite naughty, particularly when I did eventually start playing with one or two others and seemed to attract the naughty children. But the vast majority of the time I was on my own again, and I can recall even running round the playground mimicking the children playing tag, because I had no idea of asking how do you join in or just joining in. But I thought if I ran round it would at least look like to the teachers that I was. This was also the age that I can remember some of my first sensory aversions. One was an aversion to brown bread that used to get stuck at the back of my throat and make me gag, and has been a lifelong problem for me really since. The brown of the bread, the worst. And I can recall the dinner ladies still forcing it down me, and I would be the last to finish my dinner. Other sensory inversions included any itchy clothes, any clothes that were tight on my arms, my hair being brushed, my hair being combed, my hair being washed was a big one. That was absolute hell and would cause the most horrific tantrums. You'll often see my teddy in pictures, and he was something I liked to touch because he was very cooling. So I thought I'd do a bit on special interests, and for me, from a very early age, this was art, drawing and painting. And for those of you who follow me on Instagram, you might discover my separate art Instagram, which shows that I still draw and paint right up to this age. It's something I find very relaxing and calming, and something I have done all my life, and noted that many friends could not sustain the time and the concentration that I spent on painting, for example, if I had a friend round at home. I could literally go hours and forget about eating and drinking. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I started to enter some competitions and won a big RSPB competition when I was only 7. So you can see me here at the London Mall Galleries. And I got to meet Chris Packham, that's what he looked like then, fellow Autistic, and have my artwork on the front of a magazine. And there's been several competitions that I've won and have paid off since. I suppose the biggest one is achieving an A in Art A level. And I guess my next big special interest was animals. Now my aunt had a small holding, which meant I was exposed to horses from a very young age. Even though we didn't live near her, Mum used to take us on holidays there. And I was placed on a horse from the age of being a toddler. And having said that, I loved animals. It wasn't actually riding that was the main one, though I did do it. Aspects of riding terrified me. If a horse sneezed, I would cry. I think that was, again, more of a sensory issue. But there were other aspects of animals. My cat, I absolutely adored. This was my first cat. And I had rabbits that I took into school. And they weren't the only creatures that I took into school. Here I am giving my rabbit a birthday party. And that's my cat asleep in what's meant to be a doll's cot. And here's all the Great Danes and dogs at my auntie's. And eventually my own dog, my first dog, Millie. And more riding. But it was actually things like the lifestyle of frogs and newts that I was absolutely fascinated. And I would keep them in brief little tanks at home and take them into school as well, which I'm sure my teachers were delighted with, because I was insistent that the class needed to share this fascination of the frog lifestyle. And if you weren't fascinated, why the heck weren't you? And I just loved watching them go from jelly to four-legged frogs by the dune, and then we'd let them go back in the school pond. And I did that for several years on end. And as I got older, it progressed. As a teenager, I had several fish tanks. My marine fish tank progressed to a cleaner shrimp breeding programme. I was so obsessed with them. And if I wasn't living in too small a house, I know I'd be back on my saltwater fish again. That's the prize I won for caring for animals when I was 7. Ironically, it came in the same year, year 2, when I was told I was the bottom 12% of the country for science, which seems to go against all this obsession with ecosystems and animals. But I do wonder if it was related to science being around group work, for example, setting up circuits as a group. And of course, I didn't do well in groups. However, later in my school career, of course, by A-level, this wasn't an issue, and by the time I decided I wanted to pursue medicine, I managed to achieve A grades in both biology and chemistry, and in fact the highest grade in chemistry in my year group, which had been doubted all the way through. And I don't think that's an uncommon problem, sadly, for autistics. And so another interest as a child was in fact for me dolls, but again, not playing with them imaginatively, but dressing them up. And you can see this one has been dressed exactly the same as me. I can remember visiting the markets with Mum when she went shopping, and I would have to collect certain clothes for my dolls and line them up, and along with my teddies. The same with my doll's house. You can see it's full of corn yogurt trolls there. I don't know if anybody remembers them, but I would arrange and rearrange the furniture in the doll's house and put the trolls in, but never actually play with them, getting them to pretend to speak. I even remember having a fallout with a girl at school because she put a giraffe on its side and made the animals speak. And supposedly the giraffe was meant to be sleeping, but I knew a real giraffe wouldn't sleep like that. So when you're forever questioning these things, you can see how difficult it can be to make friends. These are a number of clubs I was forced into. Well, I say forced, everyone has to learn to swim, but had to join from a young age, and I hated it. I hated all the swimming clubs, brownies, and music clubs I attended. You can see my face there with brownies. Again, it was the lack of being able to join in, the feeling just different to all the other girls. And by that age, getting teased probably for being different. And then the same with the music clubs, music school, orchestras. It sometimes used to go on till 9 o'clock by the time I was a bit older than this. And, that was when I would come home and the mask would slip and the meltdowns would happen because I would just be exhausted. And it was by this point, end of primary school, year 6, and I was actually doing reasonably well for myself. I had, to some extent, fitted in through camouflaging and mimicking. This had become a lot easier because I'd moved from a primary school of 200 kids to a primary school of 60 who, just by my luck, the teacher enjoyed doing things like art, enjoyed taking kids on river trips, etc., pond dipping, and it suited me really well, and it just saw my confidence and my grades grow. It was an environment that didn't say that it was for autistics, but suited autistics, not that I knew I was one. I was encouraged and praised every step I went. And as a result here, my confidence was quite good. Unfortunately, it doesn't last long. And secondary school, which we'll cover in my next video, I was the only child or only female going there from this school, and it was a huge secondary school of 1,500. And that's where the wheels start to come off in the form of the first symptoms of anorexia. So these are the references I've used to put this video together, and I hope you find them useful. Any questions, please leave me one in the comments or DM me on my Instagram if you are on there. I'm happy to answer. I'm not happy to be trolled, however.